Jeff and I were sitting around discussing what to shoot today, and we decided just to go through DMs and do a video on the questions that we are getting the most. And right now, most questions that we're getting are regarding spinnerbaits. So this is one of my favorite things to throw in the spring. So it sounds like a lot of you guys are getting the dust off your gear and prepping for that nice warm trend that's gonna happen anytime. So today we're just gonna do a little spring refresher on spinnerbait fishing, the right rods to do it, how to choose the right spinnerbait, and how to catch a ton of fish this spring. So if you'd like to join down a fun convo, let's go. Welcome to the Hookup Tackle.
Oh, what a stud.
Yeah. Look at that.
That was sick.
Woo!
Cheers, my friends. Happy Sunday. All right, guys, some breaking news. What's new this week at the Hookup Tackle?
What a beautiful post-storm fish.
Look at that.
Look at that gut on that. That's a nice fish.
Welcome back, my friends. I am Ben with the Hookup Tackle, a tackle otaku on Instagram, also the guy with the squeakiest chair in the store. So I apologize. We will buy some WD-40 this afternoon. I'm also with my buddy Jeffrey the King. Jeff, how are you, sir?
Oh, how good.
I feel like we're having maybe our 575th conversation about spinnerbaits.
Right.
But this is a topic that obviously is an important topic to have as often as we can, because it's kind of a mainstay. When you think of bass fishing, if you think of like the main bass fishing lure of all time, spinnerbait's probably the bait that comes to mind, right? So, you know, spring is obviously probably the most known and best time to fish a spinnerbait. Depending on where you live, they might and probably eat a spinnerbait year round. But a lot of you guys are under ice, you're in winter, your fish might be deep and cold and, you know, only eating stupid little things. So, you know, the thought of, you know, warming trend and fish moving to the shallows and catching them on some, you know, powerful gear, of course, sounds exciting. So today we're just gonna do a quick little refresher. I'm gonna talk about kind of my 1-2 approach, kind of a 1-2-3 approach, I would say, to spinnerbait fishing, just to give you guys some tips and some ideas on maybe some starting points. And of course, if I miss anything, I would love for you guys to comment down below what works great for you, so collectively we can all share some great info this spring. So let's jump in to spinnerbaits. I am just going to assume that everybody knows what a spinnerbait is that's watching this episode. But just in case you don't, it's basically some lead, some skirt, some wire, and some blades. It looks absolutely nothing like anything that swims in the water until you start retrieving it. The blades spin, they flash, they vibrate, and it just gives off an amazing illusion of a bait fish swimming through the water. Now, the other thing that a spinnerbait is great at is coming through cover. And this is why it's such a great spring bait, because inevitably as spring comes and the water warms, those fish are gonna move into shallower water, look for places to spawn, feed. They're just gonna kind of live and enjoy that shallow, warm water. And a spinnerbait comes through grass, it comes through wood, it comes through everything great. So it just makes an incredible tool for this time of the year. Now, kind of my 1-2 approach is shallow spinnerbait, deep spinnerbait, okay? Now, I'm gonna talk about a couple different ways that we do that with each of these, but there's also kind of a third approach, and that's kind of micro spinnerbait for me, okay? So I would say the first two would probably make up 98% of my spinnerbait fishing. So that's shallow water where I'm just kind of running bank, kind of casting the bank, swimming it out, or fishing tree edges or grass lines, you know, stuff in 0 to 10 foot of water, right? Deep spinnerbait fishing would be more kind of offshore, so maybe looking at humps or points or ditches, areas where fish are staging before they commit to the shallows. That can be an incredibly effective pre-spawn way to catch them, because again, it's just a great tool for moving up and over wood and through rocks and really probing those depths. We're going to talk about both of those things. So let's start with just traditional shallow water spinnerbait fishing. And I'm going to cover some of my favorite baits here. So for me, kind of the three main baits that are in my arsenal are these guys. Now there are a gazillion spinnerbaits in the market, so use whatever spinnerbait you have confidence in and that's working for you, okay? If you're looking for a good starting point, this is an amazing kind of 1, 2, 3 punch for me. This is the OSP High Pitcher Max. This is the Raid Level Spin. This is the Megabass SV3. So these are three spinnerbaits that I love to fish. I would say these two probably make up 90% of my spinnerbait cast, and then I'll add this one in when I need something just slightly more finessey, right? So what do these spinnerbaits do that's different than each other? So the High Pitcher Max is usually my starting point. Now 5/8 ounce for me is kind of like my starting point with this bait. I might go to a 1/2 ounce if I'm fishing super shallow. I might go to 3/4 if I want to fish really fast. Now keep in mind that the weight on the bait is not just for depth. It can be, right? So the heavier the bait, obviously the faster it's going to sink down. So if I wanted to fish something in 20 or 25 feet, I could get it there quicker with a 3/4 ounce than I can with a 1/2 ounce. But the weight will also dictate the speed in which I can fish. So if I want to fish very, very slow, very shallow, then I'm probably going to want to do like a 3/8 ounce or a 1/4 ounce, right? So that I can fish it really, really slow. But if I want to fish kind of fast and cover a bunch of water, then I can go a little heavier into like a 5/8, you know, 1/2, 5/8, 3/4, and I can fish really quick, and that'll let that bait kind of go up and down branches, and I can cover a lot more water. So for me, you know, 1/2, 5/8, this is kind of my starting point, I would say almost always. Even if I'm fishing shallow water pond, I like to fish fast and try to cover a lot of water to try to figure out where the fish are. Then I can slow down if needed. So, High Pitcher Max, this is a great one because it's a light wire spinnerbait. So what that means is the lighter the gauge of the wire, the more it's going to vibrate. The thicker the gauge of the wire, the less it's going to vibrate, but typically the more durable it is, right? So you can see that as I bend this, it's a pretty light wire, bends very easy. So that's going to create tons of vibration, right? So you don't always need a chatterbait or a lipless to create a ton of sound, a ton of vibration under the water. A spinnerbait's a great way to create vibration under the water just by choosing the right one, okay? So this light wire really pulses under there and the fish can really feel it. I like this spinnerbait a lot because it's full size, right? So, you know, typically in early spring, you know, pre-spawn and into spawn, the fish are seeing larger bait. They're seeing full-size shad, they're seeing bluegills, they're seeing other things moving into the shallows that want to spawn and look for warmth also. So a larger full-size profile is generally my starting point. If I need to go to something a little more compact, then I'll go to that SV3. Okay, so you can see it's a little bit smaller, right? Blades are smaller, body size a little bit smaller. So I can kind of mix and match these two and cover almost everything. Where I'll add the Raid in is, the Raid is a great one for me for more horizontal cast. So I would say when I'm lake fishing from a boat, I pretty much spend 100% of my time with these two. But when I'm pond fishing and I'm having to make really long casts and I'm more horizontal to how the bait is, I really like the level spin because the way it comes in, it just comes in more level. You can even see it on there. So from a horizontal standpoint, since I don't have all the leverage and I might be making farther casts, I really like the way this bait comes in, and they eat it really good for me from shore fishing. So if you guys are pond fishing or making really long casts from shore, this might be a good one to add. Now, the other thing you can do is if you are fishing in a place where they're eating more micro type bait, smaller profile type stuff, you can always downsize and go with smaller presentation. Okay, so these are two great options when you need to downsize into something micro. And again, this isn't something that I do much this time of the year because again, most of the food is large, but this is usually where I will go post-spawn. Okay, so post-spawn, when they start seeing a lot of fry, they start seeing a lot of smaller bluegills, they start seeing little micro bait, they start thinking smaller, You can downsize into a little 1/4 ounce high pitcher, or this is a bottom up Chibeeble, and they make this in a 1/4 and a 3/8 ounce. You can see this is a much smaller footprint than, say, that, it's gonna be like that today, and say the High Pitcher Max, right? A much smaller footprint. So this is gonna look more like that little micro bait and small bait. This is gonna look more like that full size bait. Now, if they're just not there in the shallows and I want to kind of back off and throw over a point, this is a great way when they're first moving out from the main lake and heading back into coves. They will stage on like main lake points, right? So you can almost go down every main lake point in pre-spawn, and there will be fish kind of staging on that point. And then they will use that point to guide them back into the coves, bays, creek channels, that they can use for spawning. And throwing a heavier spinnerbait out deep is a great way to get them. Okay, so this is when I will go to something like a 3/4 ounce, and I will just fish it more on the bottom. So I can fish it nice and slow. I can throw it out into 20 feet, let it sink to the bottom. I can fish it uphill, I can fish it downhill, I can fish it parallel. I can do a lot of different things with this. Now, I stay with the same 2 spinnerbaits majority of time. So again, the SV3 is a great one for staying down deep, and then the High Pitcher Max is a great one for adding in little bursts of speed. So if I want to fish it slow and then kind of burn it a little bit and then go back to slow, I really like that High Pitcher Max. The SV3 is a super heavy wire spinnerbait. Okay, so where the, let me take this one, where the High Pitcher Max had the light wire to create vibration, what Megabass does is they created a heavy wire. So you can see this doesn't bend near as much. So it's a much heavier wire than that High Pitcher Max, but the blades are thinner. Okay, so again, here's the high pitcher. So you can see how kind of soft and flexible this is. So all of this wire is vibrating. On the Megabass, that wire is pretty stout, right? So it's not really moving, right? But the blade is super thin. So the blade is creating the vibration while the wire is maintaining the strength. This is important to know, because if you guys are fishing incredibly heavy cover and you need to throw, 16 pound, 18 pound, 20 pound or up, the SV3 is a great one because it won't straighten out on you. Okay, if you throw 20 pound on the High Pitcher Max and you need to hammer them out of cover, this flexes so much that you're gonna have a lot of straight spinnerbaits when they come back in the boat, which isn't necessarily a terrible thing. I just want to make sure that you're landing the fish that are biting, right? So if you're setting the hook on 20 pound and this thing is flexing a lot, you may not get the hook penetration, whereas if you set on 20 pound here, it doesn't have the same flex, so you're really getting that hook power into them. Okay, so either way, great options. Just go a little bit heavier if you need to fish deeper on those main lake points. Now, as far as alterations to a spinnerbait and colors to a spinnerbait, most of the time I'm staying in like a white or some kind of white and chartreuse type color. Okay, now when I say white, that would include something shaddy for me. So like this is a shad color, but I consider it white, right? That's a Wakasagi kind of white. So I want something white, and then I want something with some chartreuse in it. So it could be something like this, which is IU. It could be white and chartreuse. That's gonna make up almost all of my color selection for me. Now, where you guys live, if they're feeding on a lot of bluegill, you might throw something darker like a green pumpkin or a bluegill. If you're fishing super muddy water, they might want all chartreuse. You could even go into something like this, like a red spinnerbait in the spring can be incredibly effective. A lot of times when they first move up in spring, red is a trigger color, so don't be afraid to mix in some reds into your spinnerbait the same way you do with your chatterbait. Now, as far as trailers and trailer hooks go, I almost never use a trailer hook. Okay, the only time I really ever mess with a trailer hook is when I'm burning a spinnerbait in open water. And that's for two reasons. If I'm in open water, that trailer hook's not really snagging anything, so I'm not fishing it around brush and trees. As soon as you put a trailer hook on here, you've decreased the weedlessness of the bait. So I want a spinnerbait to come up and through cover, and if you're fishing it right, they almost always just get the main bait. The other thing a trailer hook does is it lengthens that out. So if they're actually eating the whole thing, that trailer hook drops down, you're gonna gill hook a lot of fish, you're gonna bleed out a lot of fish, and I don't really like to do that. So most of the time I throw it just as it is out of the package, and I don't mess with that trailer hook unless I'm getting just tons of short strikes. Now, what I will do is I will add an actual plastic trailer from time to time. 90% of the time, I just take it out of the package and throw it. But I will use plastic trailers to add color. Okay, so if I started with something like this, it's more of just like a natural shad color, I can easily take something like a 4-inch Deathadder, add that to the back, and now I have a little pop of chartreuse, right? So I'll utilize something like an OSP Action trailer or a Deathadder. Those are two great ones. Zoom split tail trailers, another one. These don't really change the speed and action too much of the spinnerbait. They just allow me to give some pops of color. So I could try a red, I could try chartreuse, I could try a white, and just give myself a little bit more body. Now, if you need to slow the bait down, you could go to something like a paddle tail. You could do something like a Keitech's a great one, 3.8 or 4.3. It'll just give you a little bit more resistance. So it'll just allow you to slow that bait down just a little bit more, which can increase strikes. So a lot of times where the fish just won't chase anything, and you need to keep it in the strike zone as long as you can. So you add something like this onto a lighter spinnerbait, like a 3/8 ounce spinnerbait, and you can literally just super slowly crawl it, and the blades are still moving. You can keep it in the strike zone. So super easy that way. All right, let's talk rods, because this is the question that I get more than anything is what's the best spinnerbait rod, or best spinnerbait rod for this, best spinnerbait rod for that. So I kind of break this down into two ways. A normal spinnerbait rod, and then like an open water, deeper water spinnerbait rod. So the spinnerbait rod that I use for myself for just kind of running bank and, you know, fishing a traditional, you know, 1/2 ounce or 5/8 ounce spinnerbait on 14 pound or 12 pound or 16 pound. For me, the last couple years has been this one. This is my go-to spinnerbait rod. This is the Megabass Destroyer P5, the dark sleeper rod. Now this rod was designed as a swim jig rod. It makes an incredible spinnerbait rod. Okay, and one of the things that I love about this rod is designed to be super sensitive when it's loaded. So once you've cast that spinnerbait and that rod has a little bend to it, all the transmission goes straight to your hands. So it's just as sensitive as a fast action rod, but it's slowed down so that it's easy to fish all day, right? That rod's not fighting you, the resistance of the spinnerbait's not fighting you, and it's soft enough to where casting a little 1/2 ounce spinnerbait around brush is incredibly accurate. If you go with too fast of a rod, when you're fishing shallow water and you got to throw it up underneath a dock or down a weed line and you need accuracy to be your friend, a super fast rod, you're going to fight a little bit on your casting accuracy. So this will slow down the release just enough to where my accuracy and my presentation goes way up, right? Once it's loaded, it's got tons of power to pull fish out of cover. It's super light. It's just a really fun rod to use. So if I was gonna pick one spinnerbait rod for everything, the Dark Sleeper is the one that I would choose. You could also go to the Javelin in the P5 line. That's the rod, the newer rod that's kind of built for spinnerbait fishing. I prefer this because it's a little bit softer. And I like that softness at the tip just for the casting accuracy. I'll give up a little bit of the fastness to make better casts. I guess if you were, you know, Tina Miki, or if you have a lot of casting skill, then maybe you don't need that softer tip and you could throw the Deimos or the Javelin or something like that. But for me, I'm gonna take every advantage I can get. So I like having just that little bit softer. Now, I don't wanna confuse softness with parabolic, right? So this isn't a chatterbait rod. Okay, I mean, you could throw a chatterbait on it, but most of the time when you think of like a square bill rod or a chatterbait rod, you're thinking of a rod that's got a full bend. That's not what we want with a spinnerbait. Remember, the spinnerbait's already flexing, right? So we want the rod to be stiff. You don't want the rod to bend and the spinnerbait to bend. Then just everything's bending and the hook's not actually penetrating, right? So because the spinnerbait's already kind of giving a little bit, we want a faster style rod. I just like the Dark Sleeper because it's got this little softness at the tip. And that tip just lets me cast super accurately, okay? As far as reels, Steez, Zillion, you know, Bantam, whatever you're into. 7-to-1 usually is the best all around. I like an 8-to-1 a lot too in the shallows. For some reason for me, a spinnerbait is one of those baits that when I'm fishing shallow, that I can, you know, I can make my cast and I can really slow down and kind of lift and move through the bushes, and I have no problem slowing myself down. A lot of lures I can't do this with, so I need like a constant speed, right? So an 8-to-1 is fine, 7-to-1 is fine, whatever works best for you. But you know, once they're hooked, I prefer the high speed. So if I'm fishing a lot of cover, the 8-to-1 lets me pull them out of trees a little bit better. Okay, now a couple other rods that I'm going to talk about. Now, another rod that I get a lot of questions on is this guy. This is the Destroyer P5 Blade. This rod was actually built specifically for spinnerbaits. It's an F5 6/8. It's a shorter rod. The Dark Sleeper is a 7/1. This is a 6/8. I like the blade for like pond fishing or super tight close range fishing or the lighter spinnerbaits. So again, if I'm going to go down to, you know, that little Beeble or the little high cut, I like the blade for that. This rod weighs nothing. It's short enough and light enough to where it almost feels like a toy. So for big water fishing where I'm going to spool up 16-pound and I want to hammer them and pull them out of cover, it's not the right rod for me. But 12-pound, 14-pound, little 1/4 or 3/8 ounce spinnerbait, closer range cast, the blade's a super dope stick. So it is a rod that has game, but for me, it's more on the finesse spinnerbait side of things versus like the big water, heavier line side of things. The other rod that I use a lot for spinnerbaits is this guy. This is the Steez 7.2 Heavy. Now this is a rod that if I'm burning and fishing really fast, or if I really need to go heavy line. So a lot of times the cover is so intense that I've got to throw 20-pound or 22-pound, or sometimes maybe even braid if it's gnarly enough, toolies, you know, super heavy vegetation, that kind of stuff. Then I'll go to this guy, the Steez 7.2 Heavy. It's an amazing open water rod. It's a little bit too much rod for most spinnerbait conditions, but it's similar to the Dark Sleeper in that it has that little softer tip. Even though it's a heavy, it's got that nice soft tip, so my casting is accurate. It weighs nothing. It's a really great rod for that kind of stuff. Okay, and then finally, for my more open water spinnerbait fishing, if I'm gonna go to like a 5/8 or 3/4 ounce or even a 1 ounce spinnerbait, I'm gonna fish it out deeper. Traditionally, the rod of choice for me has been the 904 MBR, the Megabass rod from Lumis. So the 904 is a great one. It's a 7.6 heavy. It's got more of a parabolic bend to it than the other ones, but it's still fast, right? So it's not like a slow parabolic like what you would expect the crankbait rod. So, you know, it bends, it casts well, it's got lots of sensitivity, and it's got tons of power when you need to hit them and pull them out. And it's got the length to where you can sweep hook set, and you're gonna get a lot of hook set and line pickup with it. It's a great one. Now, I've kind of replaced that rod over the last year with this guy, which is the BMG. So I think at this point, everybody probably has a BMG in their lineup for throwing like 6-inch mag. This is also an amazing one for a big spinnerbait, deep water. It's super light, it's very balanced, it's really sensitive under load. Okay, so if you've got that spinnerbait under load, then again, all that sensitivity is transferring. It's kind of like the Dark Sleeper plus, I would say. So if you like the Dark Sleeper as your day in, day out, just kind of running bank spinnerbait rod, you'll love the BMG as like your open water, deep water spinnerbait rod. It just gives you a little extra length, a little more power, can handle that 3/4 and 1 ounce size a lot better. All right, guys, that is a wrap. There is a refresher for spring spinnerbait fishing. If you guys have questions on any of the spinnerbaits, the riggings, the rods, you know, what we're looking for, what's good, what's not good, drop it down below. I will get an answer for you. If there's something that we didn't cover that you think is important for people to know for spring spinnerbait fishing, drop that down below too, because I want to learn from you and I want everybody to collectively learn together, and let's all go catch a ton of spinnerbait fish this spring. Jeff, favorite spinnerbait?
My favorite spinnerbait of all time?
Yeah.
It's probably the SV3.
Yeah, you've caught a lot of fish on the SV3.
I have.
Yeah.
And man, when they truck it,
They
God,
smoke
they
it.
truck it.
They smoke it, yeah. And I know you're a swim bait guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
But this is a bite that you and I have been on together multiple times,
dude.
and you seem to really enjoy when we're on a good spinnerbait
I'm really.
bite.
It's a good time.
Yeah.
It's not the swim bait bite, but I mean, when you're fishing a spinnerbait as fast as you can,
Yeah.
and they're ripping the rod out of your hands,
Yeah.
I mean, it's fishing at the end of the day, dude.
I feel like, you know, there's been so much controversy over, you know, forward-facing sonar and, you know, this isn't real bass fishing and all this stuff. But when you think of, like, just when you strip it all away
Yeah.
and you think of just bass fishing,
Yep.
a bait casting rod, some heavy line,
Yeah.
a single hook bait that you can throw into some brush and wind it out and get the bite and have to haul the fish out. Like, that's the most bass fishing
That's what it was
thing
founded
of
on.
bass fishing,
Yeah.
right? So if you can catch them this way, for me, it's just so enjoyable, right? So hopefully that was useful, guys. Again, if you have questions, drop it down below, and we will see you guys soon. Enjoy the spring spinnerbait bite. I'm going to, as soon as we get some warm weather. Enough of this winter. Okay, peace.